Have you ever heard of a slow creature outsmarting the fastest? This is the story of how a clever tortoise won a race against the speedy hare. It was a bright, sunny morning in a peaceful forest when the boastful hare decided it was time to prove just how fast he was. With his ears perked up, he ran circles around the other animals, laughing at how slow they seemed in comparison. "Look at me. I am the fastest creature in the entire forest," he boasted, puffing out his chest. The other animals watched, but they were tired of hearing the same thing over and over again. They had all seen the hare race through the forest, and they were tired of his arrogance. Just as the hare was showing off again, the wise old tortoise slowly walked by, keeping to her steady pace. The hare noticed her, and a sneer formed on his face. "Hey, tortoise," he said, still puffing his chest. "You must know that I am the fastest animal in this forest. Do you want to race me? I'll beat you in no time." The tortoise didn't flinch. She simply looked up at the hare, her calm eyes unbothered by his mocking words. "All right," she said, surprising the hare. "I accept your challenge." The hare laughed so hard, he nearly lost his balance. "You? Race me. This will be easy." The other animals gathered around to watch, curious about what the tortoise had in mind. The race was set. The finish line was just across the wide river, beyond the tall hills. The hare was confident, and the tortoise remained quiet, her face a picture of patience. The race began. The hare darted forward like a streak of lightning, and within seconds, he was so far ahead of the tortoise that he could hardly see her in the distance. "I'm going to win," the hare shouted as he dashed up a steep hill. "This will be the easiest victory of my life." But the tortoise? She moved at her usual steady pace, one step after another. She wasn't in a rush. She wasn't worried. The tortoise had something the hare didn't: patience. As the hare raced ahead, he saw a small shaded spot under a tree near the halfway point of the race. He looked back and saw the tortoise slowly climbing the hill. A wicked idea crossed his mind. "Why should I waste my energy when I've already won?" he thought. "I'll just take a quick nap, and then finish the race when I'm ready." The hare settled under the tree, closing his eyes and relaxing. The tortoise, still at the bottom of the hill, kept climbing steadily. Time passed. The sun climbed higher, and the hare continued to sleep soundly, confident he would win the race. He snored lightly, unaware that the tortoise was slowly but surely closing the gap. Meanwhile, the tortoise trudged on. She was getting closer to the top of the hill. The animals who had gathered to watch were starting to notice something strange. The hare, once so far ahead, was still asleep. The tortoise passed the halfway point. Her legs were tired, but she didn't stop. She was almost at the top of the hill, and she could see the finish line in the distance. But would she make it in time? Would the hare wake up and stop her before she crossed the line? What happens next? The tortoise reached the top of the hill, her heart racing, but she never stopped. Her pace was steady, slow, and deliberate. Below her, the sleeping hare lay under the tree, unaware of how close she was to winning. The animals who had been watching from the sidelines began to murmur amongst themselves. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. The tortoise, so slow and steady, was gaining on the hare, who was still deep in sleep, his chest rising and falling with each snore. The finish line was in sight. The tortoise could see the river ahead, and beyond it, the distant hills that marked the end of the race. She knew she had to keep going, no matter how tired her legs felt. The forest was silent now, and only the sound of her footsteps filled the air. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the tortoise crossed the finish line. Slowly, she raised her head and saw the other animals cheering for her. The victory was hers. She had won the race. Just as she stood there, catching her breath, the hare stirred from his sleep. He blinked his eyes open and stretched his limbs, yawning loudly. He stood up, looking around for the tortoise. "Wait a minute, where is she?" the hare said to himself, confused. He looked down the hill, and his eyes widened in shock. The tortoise was standing proudly at the finish line, her slow and steady journey having led her to victory. The hare's heart sank. He couldn't believe it. How could she have beaten him? The other animals who had gathered to watch the race were cheering even louder now, celebrating the tortoise's triumph. The hare stood frozen in place, his pride shattered. How did you do it?" the hare asked, his voice filled with disbelief. The tortoise, who had been waiting for him to wake up, smiled gently. "I did it with patience, persistence, and belief in myself," she said. "You were so sure of your speed, but it wasn't about speed, it was about steady effort and never giving up." The hare hung his head, shame filling his heart. I thought I could win easily, he admitted. But I was wrong. I underestimated you. The tortoise nodded. It's not about being the fastest. It's about staying the course, no matter the obstacles. The journey is just as important as the destination. As the animals celebrated the tortoise's victory, the hare learned a valuable lesson. His pride had been his downfall. He realized that sometimes, slow and steady really does win the race. And from that day on, the hare never underestimated the power of patience again. He learned that sometimes, the quietest and most persistent efforts are the ones that lead to the greatest victories. Moral of the story: slow and steady wins the race. It's not always about being the fastest or the loudest. Success comes from persistence, patience, and the courage to keep going, no matter what.